interviewing former longtime AP Newsman Bryant Thomas. Bryant, what's the news on Mueller and the implications of that?
Well, Mueller went before the cameras at the Justice Department on Wednesday to indicate that he was coming forth of his own volition, that no one had blessed the appearance, that no one had told him he couldn't do it. And he went on to elucidate what he essentially put out in his report. And he did not add to it, he did not detract from it. And he did send a message, a broadside message to Congress um, to get busy with the business of doing its job. And that, of course, would be to review the evidence put forth in the report as to whether this president should be impeached.
So, in other words, if the people in Congress, especially the Democrats, don't like the Mueller report and the conclusion that there was no collusion, it's up to Congress to figure it out themselves. The ball is in their court, essentially.
Well, I think that's true. And he's challenging them to do what they were elected to do, took an oath of office to do, which is the most telling thing that he said today, that he doesn't have the avenue to proceed with any illegality against the president, that is prohibited by Constitution while Trump is in office, and that if there is a remedy that is needed to correct some of the activities of the president while he was in office, then Congress has the ability to do that with the impeachment process.
So, despite the criticism he's been getting, you think that essentially he's been playing it straight?
Right down the middle. I think that everybody who worked for him and MSNBC was loaded with some of his subordinates who said, this is classic Mueller. This is a guy who doesn't play favorites, who looks at the evidence and who puts it on the table for everyone to view, whether they're prosecutors or whether they're lawmakers.
Do you believe in the prevailing presumption that Congress is unlikely to start impeachment proceedings?
That depends upon how the poll numbers move. I think it's unrealistic to think that anybody on Capitol Hill would move to impeach this president unless there is strong public support to do so. Right now, we're just under 50% of the public who thinks that we should proceed with impeachment. If that number gets up to the high 50s and low 60s, or even into the mid 60s, then you're going to see things happen that have not happened yet.
But Brian, what would it take really to get the public enraged past the point of just presuming or dismissing it as more political football being passed back and forth, take it out of the realm of politics and one-upmanship into something as serious enough, as egregious enough to really outrage public opinion to get that support for impeachment?
Well, I think that material probably lies within the bowels of the Mueller report, the majority of which has not been made public. If the Democrats get their hands on this entire report and take a scope of this report and say that, yes, there is indeed a high crime and misdemeanor level that we have achieved, then you'll see impeachment move forward. And what's hard to understand here is if there is nothing there to hide, then why is the White House being so intent on not coming forward with what everybody wants to know?
So you don't see this just as a Democratic payback for what the Republicans did with Clinton, where they actually did impeach him?
No, I think that, the same thing applies here, is that impeachment in its present form, given what is public, will not pass the Senate. We know that. They need 14 Republicans to defect, assuming all the Democrats do support impeachment, in order to convict this president and remove him from office. We're a long way from that.
What do you think it's going to take to get to that point?
I think if there's something bomb buster nature in this report that has not come out yet, something which is irrefutable, something which can damage the Republican Party, in the next election, even more than they've been damaged in 2018, then you'll see the ball move.
One last question. What do you see as the likelihood of all of this happening?
Well, that's a good question. It all depends on what's in the report. It'll take an awful lot for Republicans to move off the dime here. What will move them off the dime is if there is enough bad news in this report so that they get tainted even more than they have been so far. I think that 40 lost House seats in the last election should have been a wake-up call for these Republicans. So far, it isn't affecting that many of them in the Senate. And the monkey that's on their back right now is that more Republicans are up for re-election in 2020 than were up for re-election in 2018. So this is a potentially very dangerous thing for Republicans at the polls next year. And if they want to go ahead and keep supporting Trump, that's okay, but they do it at their own risk.
Okay, former longtime AP newsman out of Washington, Bryant Thomas, thanks for being with us.
You're welcome.